Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com, how to easily make straw micarta and walnut hybrid composite knife scales. Now these scales have a pretty dynamic look, but they're actually very easy to make. It's a combination of fiberglass resin, and I found some straw-like material down at the local arts and crafts supply store. But you could use moss, you could use straw, almost anything. I did end up using some black liners and walnut to kind of highlight the color of the straw. We're going to start with a very basic micarta press, and all it is a sheet of wood, and I screwed a couple of 1x2s onto the sides, and I left a space for a 1x3 or a 1x4 in the middle. I'm then going to coat that with wax paper, and then this is the straw material that I found at Michael's Art Supply. It was actually in the silk flower department, and I guess they use it for bedding around the silk flower arrangements. I liked the color and I liked the texture of it, and I thought it would give it a try making knife scales out of it. So I'm just going to press that into that little makeshift micarta press. And if you take a good look at that, I use some duct tape on both sides. So unlike a regular micarta press where you're going to really clamp down, this one would not. We're almost making a boat that's going to hold the fiberglass resin. This is regular fiberglass resin. I mixed in a few drops of brown modeler's paint. I didn't want to make it completely opaque. I wanted it to be translucent, but I did want it to have a brown tinge or tint to it. Don't go overboard with the brown paint. You will make that opaque very quickly. When I was all done, I put another sheet of wax paper, and then I'm going to put the board that fits in the middle. And unlike a regular micarta press where we're going to use clamps to press it down, really I just want to weight this board a little bit. The object is just to kind of push that straw material into the resin and end up with a flat surface on both sides. So after that completely dries, it does come out of the wax paper pretty easily, pops off of the wax paper pretty easily. And although it's not polished, you can get an idea as to what the finished product is going to look like. I can see into the material, and I can see that straw material inside. Now what I've done here is I've cut it into strips, and I also cut a couple of walnut strips, and I cut 45-degree angles on one side of each, just with a chop saw. And I'm going to glue these together. The end results, the scales or the knife handles that I want to make, are going to be a combination of walnut and this straw micarta. So instead of just having a 90-degree cut and regular glue, I'm going to make 45s, and this way when you start to grind them into the curved shape of the knife handles, you'll end up with a nice curved joint. And this is a pretty easy process. You don't have to do this. If you just wanted to make the micarta handles, you could make the entire handle out of the micarta. This is just what I wanted, the end result of what I wanted for this particular knife project. So here you see the two 45s. I'm just using a two-part epoxy, only because of the resin on the micarta. I figured it would just stick a little bit better. Once that glue is completely dry, you can see that it's not completely even. I do take that back over to a belt sander, smooth all of the edges, square up everything as best as possible. And the next step is I did want to have black liners. I don't know how a lot of people make liners, but the way I make them is I use black construction paper and fiberglass resin. So I'm basically making micarta liners. And I just laminate a few sheets, probably 4 or 5 sheets of the black construction paper, and then I also put fiberglass on whatever scale material I'm making, and then I press that right into or right on top of that construction paper. And I'll put a little weight on that later. It doesn't go into a press or anything, it just gets a little weight on it. And the end result is going to be that those liners, whatever color liner you make, will actually be attached to the scale blank at this time. I put a little bit of wax paper over it, and I have a couple of bricks or a couple pavers that I use just to weight them down. Modern technology at its finest. Alright, so once those are dry, you can just take the wax paper off. And now the liners are attached to the blanks, to the scale blanks. And you can just trim off some of that micarta with a scissor, or you can bring it over to the belt sander. These particular blanks were way too thick. This is my first time making this straw micarta. I made it way too thick. My bandsaw was not working very well, so I just marked how thick I wanted them, and I trimmed down the actual thickness of the material just with a disc grinder, with a flap sanding wheel. I think it was a 36 grit. It really went through the material quickly. Then I cut an angle with the chop saw on the walnut side of the scales to match the angle of the brass bolsters on this knife. And that was just a kind of a test fit. I drew the outline of the handle of the knife blank, and then I'm just trimming these a little bit oversized on a pin saw. But at least now you're getting an idea as to what the finished product is going to look like. The scales are attached just like any scales. I use 2-part epoxy, and I did mix a couple drops of black paint into that to correspond with the black liners. These particular scales are being held on with 2 1/4-inch brass pins. So I'm just going to use a pair of vice grips and make sure those pins are inserted all of the way through, so that they protrude on both sides. And then I'll clamp these scales, nice and tight. For this particular project, I'm just using a vise, and then I'll also put a couple clamps on the top side just to clamp the top edge of those scales in place. Oh, my trick of the trade is I always wear 2 pair of gloves. This way, when I get glue on one pair, I can just take that outer pair off, and I'm ready to go. And the main objective is not to get any of that glue on the blade of the knife. So after the scales come out of the vise and that epoxy is dry, I'm going to use a disc grinder, again with that flap sanding wheel, to start shaping those scales. And you don't have to use a disc grinder. You could use a Dremel grinder. You could go over to your belt sander. There's a lot of ways of carving this material. I happen to like the disc grinder. And of course, you just keep fitting it to your hand to see when it feels good. You keep a good eye on both sides. Try to make both sides of the scales equal. In thickness and in shape and in curve, so that they're uniform. And it really works just like working with wood scales. I mean, the fiberglass resin or the straw micarta really grinds and sands just like wood. One of the final steps is I use an oscillating sander, and I start with an 80, and then I go to a 220 on that to do the final sanding before I bring it over to the buffing wheel. And the buffing wheel is really going to bring out, hopefully, what those handles will really look like. So hopefully it'll bring out a nice shine. This is my first time working with this material, so this is the first time I'm going to get a look at the finished product also. And after just a little bit of buffing, we can really start to see how those scales are going to shine. So this is the finished product. I was very happy with the end result. It's pretty dynamic, very easy to make. It really fits this particular blade pretty well. I'm actually doing 2 videos on this knife build. This is the first video is going to be the handles, the scales. The second video will be the entire knife build and grind. But anyway, this is a very easy project. I hope you can check us out on the web at DIYEasyCrafts.com. Be sure to check out our other how-to videos. And if you like this video, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel.